kind of cottage industry offering explanations and analyses of Stanley Kubrick's The Shining has emerged over the past 45 years since the film's 1980 release. But it has exploded over the past 20 years or so, even resulting in a fascinating documentary devoted entirely to theories about what the film means, 2012's Room 237, directed by Rodney Asher. The theories are all over the place, ranging from the film being a Kubrick confession that he staged the 1969 moon landing, to the film being a treatise on genocide, either the Native American genocide, the Holocaust, or both. What is the film really about? What explains the many seemingly unexplainable things in the movie, some of which appear to be mistakes that don't make sense, especially given Kubrick's famous reputation for perfectionism? The answer does not require exotic theories that sometimes strain credulity. The answer is rooted in a device called the distancing effect, also referred to as the alienation effect. The distancing effect is the product of the theories and techniques of German dramatist Bertolt Brecht, designed to keep audiences from becoming emotionally involved in the story or connected to the characters by reminding them that they are in a theater and witnessing something artificial. Why would he want this, since emotional investment seems crucial to an audience's understanding and empathy? Brecht, a devoted socialist, wanted audiences to connect to material intellectually rather than emotionally. By reminding them that they were in a theater filled with actors pretending to be other people, he thought that they could better focus on ideas and themes. Remember who Stanley Kubrick was. Beyond being arguably the greatest film director of all time, he was an incredibly intelligent man, a rationalist who did not believe in organized religion or the supernatural. He was the last director one would expect to make a ghost story of a film. I would argue that he did not make a ghost story about a haunted hotel in Colorado. He made a film about domestic violence, a subcategory of the ideas that obsessed Kubrick throughout his entire career, the essential nature of humankind and its seeming inability to avoid violence. Think about the 7 films that spanned the final 35 years of his life. Dr. Strangelove is cinema's most brilliant satire, using humor to highlight how perfectly ridiculous we are as humans, an immature species that unlock the secrets of the universe only to create weapons capable of bringing about our own destruction. 2001: A Space Odyssey is about humankind being unable to shed itself of violence despite millennia of evolution and progress. Even the story's artificial intelligence, HAL 9000, resorts to violence because it has been programmed by and taught to think like people. A Clockwork Orange is about free will being central to our humanity, even when that free will means deciding to commit horrible acts of violence. While Barry Lyndon focuses more on identity and social climbing, the events that shape and guide the title character's life are rooted in war and violence. Full Metal Jacket is one of the great anti-war films ever made, exploring, as Matthew Modine's Joker character says, the confounding duality of man. His final film, Eyes Wide Shut, focuses on insecurity and jealousy and how those things manifest themselves in relationships through sex. But as we know all too well, insecurity and jealousy all too often lead to violent outcomes. Through this lens, we begin to understand Kubrick's intent in The Shining. Kubrick takes Stephen King's supernatural ghost story of a novel and uses it merely as a framework, a container in which the story and its characters are placed for study and reflection. Kubrick utilizes the distancing effect to remind us that we're watching a film in a stage setting, which forces us to analyze what we're witnessing instead of having us cower in fear, something that would render intellectual thought impossible. Much focus has been put on Kubrick's design of the Overlook Hotel, the layout of which makes no sense. This has led many to assert that this speaks to the supernatural aspect of the story. I disagree. I believe it is Kubrick reminding us that this world does not exist and that the supernatural does not exist. He is urging us to focus on the flaws and weaknesses of Jack Nicholson's character and how they lead to the dissolution of his marriage and family. The supernatural is not required to make this happen. You take a character who comes from a family with an alcoholic and abusive father, and King is very explicit about these things in the novel. Make him an alcoholic whose tendency toward violence leads to the loss of a teaching career and the infliction of an injury upon his son, and then place that character in extreme isolation with his son and a wife, Wendy, that seems meek but whom he sees as overbearing, and disaster is simply a matter of time. Jack sees himself as a failure who cannot impose his will on the world or the people around him. He was a teacher who lost his job. In the novel, it was because he physically assaulted a student who vandalized his car. He cannot finish writing a novel or play that would establish him as a creative writer capable of charting his own path. He must take a job as the winter caretaker of a hotel, something that requires no real intelligence or creativity. This is a huge blow upon his sense of self, particularly as a man in that time. His idea of masculinity weighs upon him, reflected in his perusal of a Playgirl magazine as he waits in the hotel lobby to meet with the manager to officially get the job. This has been cited as one of the strange details of the film. There is no way that a Playgirl magazine would be sitting in the lobby of a hotel, but it makes perfect sense from a Brechtian standpoint. It is a stark disruption and a reminder that we are spectators in an artificial world, one in which we must think about what is happening with this character and why. The manager, Stuart Ullman, has an office with an impossible exterior window, given the hallway that clearly runs behind it and into the kitchen. Similarly, Jack's son Danny eventually rides his big wheel tricycle through the hallways that clearly show the impossibility of rooms that would need to float over the hotel lobby, as well as the nonsensical placement of doors that would lead to different parts of one hotel room and not to other hotel rooms entirely. It is Kubrick's cinematic version of Brechtian theatrical devices, such as projecting images or words upon a screen on the stage, or the deliberate exposure of lights, cables, and ropes. Anything that would get the audience to recognize artificiality so that they could unemotionally ask why and engage in analysis. This happens throughout the film. A typewriter changes from white to gray. A chair against the wall behind Jack's writing station in the Colorado lounge disappears and reappears. The television that Wendy and Danny watch is not plugged in and should not work. This means we should focus on what they're watching, Summer of 42, a film about various aspects of sexuality, including sexual panic. These things remind us in a jarring way that this is a film, and it begs detached assessment. Kubrick's movie is not really scary. There's never a moment, perhaps excepting Jack leaping from behind a pillar to wield an axe, that makes us jump or yelp. The Shining is suspenseful, and Kubrick's masterful use of sound and eerie music builds a sense of dread, but it is not traditionally scary. This is purposeful. The film, at its core, is about a flawed man whose life circumstances combine to create a scenario in which domestic violence is the inevitable, tragic outcome. His various failures have him questioning his masculinity, which he explores first through his perusal of the Playgirl magazine. The conversation between Jack and a ghostly bartender is not supernatural. It is reflective of the alcoholic weakness that Jack hates about himself, yet craves to embrace because it is a way to escape his sense of failure, but which will, of course, simply lead to more problems, inevitably violent. As he imagines falling into a bottle of bourbon, he crudely and derisively refers to his wife as a sperm bank.
Nothing I can't handle, though, Lloyd. Thanks.
He is reassuring himself, not the imaginary Lloyd. It is crucial that the encounter with the woman in the tub immediately follows. It is not a moment with a literal succubus, but it is representative of Jack's desire to prove his masculinity and worth through the sexual act, and doing so with an attractive younger woman will validate his virility. But the woman morphs into a hideous figure, emblematic of his psychological fears and how he symbolically sees his own wife. Use of the mirror is crucial. Kubrick uses mirrors, reflections, and doubling throughout to symbolize our dual nature as humans. We all have a dark side that we fear or struggle to keep under control, and which may emerge when we are most vulnerable. Jack is seen through mirrors. In a genius sequence, has the hotel cook, Scatman Crothers Halloran, open the door to a kitchen storeroom in a mirrored fashion and have the perspective change from one end of a hallway to the other when he, Wendy, and Danny emerge from it. Jack, of course, is mirrored in the figure of Grady. a former caretaker of the hotel who killed his wife, 2 daughters, and then himself. Grady is initially given the first name Charles by Ullman when he uses Grady as a cautionary tale about the effects of isolation, but he later introduces himself to Jack in a fantastical party sequence as Delbert. The mix-up isn't because Kubrick forgot the name. Grady is merely the anonymous face of domestic violence, a husband and father who loses his sense of worth, blames his wife and children, and then focuses his frustration and rage at them. Actor Philip Stone's Grady even uses a symbolic euphemism for his actions, saying that he merely corrected them for their transgressions and desired to prevent him from doing his duty. Jack, of course, does the same thing when Wendy wants them all to leave the hotel. Jack equates Wendy's concern for Danny as a lack of concern for him, and how his leaving the hotel will be seen as an abandonment of his duty, further cementing his status as a failure.
You ever had a single moment's thought about my responsibilities? Have you ever thought for a single solitary moment about my responsibilities to my employers?
It is a tense scene, difficult to watch, not because it's scary in a horror film sense, but because Nicholson displays a rage that is bubbling out of control to the surface, ready to find a target. Our fear isn't of the supernatural in any way. It's an intellectual fear that Jack, with no help in sight, will follow through on his threat to bash her brains in. We are forced to intellectually confront one of the ugliest aspects of our humanity and our society. Domestic violence is one of the most common forms of violence in the country, perhaps the most common when considering unreported incidents. At least 24 people are victims of domestic violence every minute. The scene in which Jack comes at Wendy with an axe and she attacks him with a knife is more disturbing from a detached intellectual standpoint than it is from a horror film standpoint. Danny, of course, is symbolic of the innocents caught in the crossfire, who runs an increased risk of engaging in the same behavior when he matures into an adult. It's a psychological maze from which we can't seem to escape. The cycle of violence is ultimately reflected in the Twilight Zone type ending, when Jack is shown front and center at a 4th of July party at the Overlook Hotel in 1921. Jack and Grady are reflections of each other and of all the men who came before them, letting failure, alcohol, and violence manifest the worst fears and aspects of their characters, destroying not just themselves, but the lives of those around them.